Okay, great. All right. So thank you for having us for the this webinar today. Dr. Wang and I, Kai, have been working on this project, and we're happy to share it with you, our colleagues here in North Carolina Community College System. So as JJ mentioned, I'm Bryan Ryan, Senior Vice President of Effectiveness and Innovation, and my colleague Kai Wang is also on the line. He's our Senior Dean of Strategic Innovations. Kai will probably have limited involvement today because he had to have his gallbladder taken out over the last weekend, and so he's still recovering from that, but I think he's called in from Washington, D.C. So what you're going to see today is this project that we call Finish First. I'll get to that in a minute. Start here with this is our, at Wake Tech, this is our old logo and our old motto. If you understand Latin, that Pamam qui meruit ferat essentially means let the symbol of achievement go to those who have earned it. That's a paraphrase of it. And the project that we're going to talk about today is focused on that very thing. How do we help our students who have earned certificates, diplomas, and certificates get the achievements and the credentials that they've deserved? Our current, in the right-hand corner, you can see our current logo, and our current motto is lead the way. So everybody knows that Wake Tech is one of the community college systems colleges, so I'll skip that slide. Again, this project is called Finish First, and Kai and I have been working on this for some time, and we're able to bring it to you and other colleges. Today we're using a webinar, but we have visited a number of community colleges in the system face-to-face, and we're happy to not only share this presentation with you all, but if you're interested, Kai and I can make it a point to come and visit your colleges and share the tool that we're going to talk about here today with you and the folks at your college who can make best use of it. This is a data-driven tool for direct impact on student success and completion. And one of the key things we want to talk about here today is how we focused on trying to have a direct impact on student success. And the subtitle there is a Wake Tech Applied Benchmarking Project. As some of you may know, at Wake Tech, Dr. Scott, our recently retired president, had put in place a process that everybody at the college is supposed to identify a problem to solve, and then we do this problem-solving process that's called applied benchmarking to address those problems and try to make an impact.
Hello, this is Maria.
On those problems.
Hello?
So this is one of those projects.
Hold on one second, Mr. Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ryan, will you please press *6 as well as Mr. Wang to unmute yourself?
All right, so as I was saying, this is an applied benchmarking project, and so Kai and I have been working on this to try to solve a problem that we identified, and we looked at some processes that were in place in we benchmarked other institutions, and we brought what we learned back to Wake Tech and actually adapted it and created this tool that we're going to talk about today. So key takeaways for Finish First is that it's a direct impact on student success. I'll get to that in a minute, more detail. And basically, in order to do that, we decided that we were going to begin with the end. Wake Tech was a completion by design college, one of the 5 North Carolina cadre colleges. The folks at the Gates Foundation I've created this loss momentum framework. It looks at the student life cycle in these 4 phases: connection, entry, progress, and completion. And what Kai and I did, by way of beginning with the end, we decided that we were going to see what we could do to help students that were at or very near completion actually cross that finish line. And that was the first focus of this Finish First project. Many people talk about the student pipeline, and so we decided what we're going to do is to take the loss momentum framework and apply it to this metaphor of the student pipeline, student experience, and look at how we could use the data that was available to us and tools that were available to us to help first identify the leaks in the process, and then what we could do to plug those leaks in the student life cycle so that students were making more progress and completing more effectively. A lot of what you're going to hear about today shows Kai Wang's ability to do a lot of things, including do some programming that has helped us with this. He drew the original model of this pipeline on a napkin, and I can tell you that Kai is not an artist, so we asked our folks in graphics in the communications department to create for us this graphic. And what you can see here is that we've looked at each of the areas. What we discovered is that in going from one phase to the next is where students tend to drop out of the pipeline. The leaks happen, for example, between connection and entry, between entry and progress, between progress and completion, and right at the very end of the completion process. So what we wanted to do was to use the data that was readily available to us and some of the tools that were readily available to us to address that issue. This is the same thing. It's basically just in words what you saw in the previous picture. And one of the things to continue with the idea that we're going to begin with the end is, instead of starting with applied but were not admitted, which is at the beginning of the cycle, our first approach in using these data analytics was to identify individuals who had actually completed credentials with us at Wake Tech, but for one reason or another, they didn't know and we didn't know. So the data that we were able to use and the process we used helped us to identify those students. And then the other piece that was very important is the third item here is they've completed a lot of courses. They're very close to finishing their credentials, but they're losing ground in some cases. There's a significant amount of data out there that shows that many of the students who don't complete at community colleges are within a few courses or a semester of actually completing. So that was the focus. Our goal here was to find every leak and reach every student. So this, we're using our analysis of data here to look at large numbers of students. At Wake Tech we have about 30,000 students a year. But even though we have that number of students, what the data allows us to do is to focus on every individual student and to find out what the issues that those students are facing and to devise a solution that addresses the individual needs of every student. So that's one of the powers that we discovered in this process in working with the data. Kai, you out there? You feeling okay? You want to pick up this slide? I think if you could push *6, you can unmute yourself. Well, I can go ahead if Kai's
Please go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, Kai had to have his gallbladder out, and he's such an amazing guy that he just watched a YouTube and he was able to take his own gallbladder out. So that's an amazing quality.
Thank you.
Are you there, Kai?
I can't laugh. You don't make me laugh.
So I talked about readily available data, and one of the things that everybody has available to them is the National Student Clearinghouse. That gives you information about the courses students have taken at your college and at other colleges, and then also our own colleague system here at Wake Tech. So those were the key sources of data. And I think that I'm going to back up a little bit here. Because we were able to use the National Student Clearinghouse, these leaks that we're going to talk about in a minute, we know that these students are, we've lost them for some reason at Wake Tech, and they are not at another college or university, and that's where that National Student Clearinghouse information was helpful to us. So when we're talking about students, you're going to see the numbers in our first couple cohorts at Wake Tech here in a minute. We're talking about students that in this student life cycle following the completion by design framework in our pipeline model, students who have, for one reason or another, are not making progress at Wake Tech. They haven't transferred successfully someplace else, or they're not at another school, and that's the important part of the National Student Clearinghouse. And Kai has developed a tool that simplifies the process of identifying which students are not at other colleges. And then we've also used our data at the college through Colleague. So here's basically what we've done, and just in full disclosure, Kai and I have a great partnership here. I ask a lot of questions, and I say, why can't we do X, Y, and Z? And Kai's the one who's able to do the programming to answer the questions that I've asked and to develop the tool that we're going to talk about today. He used to be our department head for computer programming, so he has a significant amount of experience there. But really, just to reemphasize, we're using off-the-shelf tools here. And what Kai did was basically he developed an algorithm that uses Visual Basic that sits behind Excel, Microsoft Excel. And I call it a big matchmaker. It's much more involved than that, but from my simplified perspective, what we do is we take every one of our students. If you look on the left there, you see student 1, student 2, student N. We have 30,000 students that we're looking at Wake Tech, and we have 275 programs. And what we do is we evaluate every student's transcript against every curriculum program that we have. And this is an approach that it's not, as we describe it, it's not the approach where you build sidewalks and hope students will walk on those sidewalks. It's we find out where students have walked, we look at the paths they've created, and then we build the sidewalks underneath them. So what happens here is by looking at every student in every program, we don't just accept the intent of the student to be in a specific program. We actually follow the behavior of the student to determine which programs they've actually taken. And since we have students, and you probably do too, we have students who they sign up for a particular program, but for one reason or another, they end up taking a variety of courses. Some of those courses are not maybe in their priority program, but they're in another program, and since we have a significant number of certificates, diplomas, and degrees, we wanted to see what the student's behavior had achieved. And so what we were able to do is to find that some students, while they're listed in one program, they've actually completed the requirements for another program here at Wake Tech. So again, this is not building the sidewalks. We're finding out where the students are going, and we're alerting them to the fact that they've earned these credentials. So every student against every credential at Wake Tech. And what we did as a proof of concept, Kai and a few of other of us here at Wake Tech, we identified a small cohort of students. We printed out their transcripts, and we sat down and looked at the transcripts and compared them against our catalog to see if this was likely to be fruitful to develop this kind of program that Kai developed. And what we found fairly quickly was there are a lot of interesting things that emerged from that. We did see that this proof of concept suggested that we should go forward and develop this tool. We also realized that doing this manually, especially with our programs here at Wake Tech, was not going to be a feasible approach, and especially since it took us a significant amount of time just to work with a small number of students. And Kai did a slide here for you to talk about, at least at Wake Tech, this computer tool that we've developed is powerful and fast, significantly more powerful and faster than if we tried to do this manually at Wake Tech. So as we mentioned, we have 30,000 students, 275 programs. I think Kai said that generates more than 8 million possibilities. If we were going to compare all of our students against all of our programs manually, we would need 60 full-time students working 5 days a week for 52 weeks. I actually timed Kai in doing one of those evaluations that through the colleague system, and then we multiplied that out. And that's just doing it once per year. We do it at Wake Tech now 3 times a year each semester to make sure that we've captured all the students. So you can see that it's either going to take you 3 times as long, or you'll need 3 times as many employees to at least to serve us here at the college at Wake Tech. What this tool does is it just takes a few minutes, and it does all of that work in a few minutes. So significantly more effective than what we were doing. And you may have the resources, people, and time to do that, but at Wake Tech we've wanted to do that faster and cheaper. So that's what we've been able to do. And when I say we, I mean Kai's been able to develop this tool. I just keep asking for it to do more, and we keep working on adding features to it. So this data tool that we've developed, again, it runs on Visual Basic, and it's behind our Microsoft Excel. Kai originally ran it on his Microsoft Surface, so it doesn't require huge hardware resources either, although it does require more than his Microsoft Surface, which I'll explain here in a minute. So what we've done is develop this tool. It now identifies first-time in college students and those who've transferred out, and it makes use of the National Student Clearinghouse for that purpose. It also identifies students who are within striking distance from completion, and by striking distance we define that as basically a student is 1 semester away from completing, and if it's a certificate, that's significantly sometimes fewer courses, diploma and degree, it's full-time load. We've also used the software to identify the students who've already completed one of the credentials we have at Wake Tech, but they hadn't yet had applied for graduation. One of the reasons that happens for us at Wake Tech is because we were a completion by design school, we went through the process of creating structured pathways. We did a lot of work as part of that project to make sure that all of our certificates and diplomas were nested within our degrees. So we have both structured pathways and stackable credentials. And since almost every one of our associate degrees in our career programs has a certificate that's nested within it, many of these cases were students who were still trying to make progress towards earning their degree, their associate degree, but they had already earned a certificate. And because we hadn't highlighted that as much as we could have, and students weren't as aware of that as they could have been, they hadn't yet completed those certificates. So this particular tool identifies for those students the single certificate, in some cases multiple certificates that they had completed as part of their work here at Wake Tech. But we also noticed a number of students who had, even though they were in an Associate of Arts program, for example, they had taken enough courses in a business administration certificate to earn that certificate. And we had a significant number of students who had completed the requirements for an associate degree but had not gone through the process of applying for that. So these were the leaks that we identified in our first couple cohorts when we first did this. As you can see, again, getting back to the idea of beginning with the end, because of the size of Wake Tech and that we had a number of students that were in this, we had about, you can see that number of 9,132. About half of those students were within one semester of completing their credentials, and about half of those students had already completed a credential of some sort at Wake Tech. So because the program identifies the student individual, their contact information, and those we could contact those students and let them know that this credential was available to them. And then with the students who are close to completing, I'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute, those students, we could tell them specifically which classes they needed to take in order to complete a specific credential. So our advisors, we have a hybrid model here at Wake Tech. Our transfer students are advised through an advising center. Our career program students are advised by their faculty advisors. We could give that information to the appropriate advisors, and they could share that with the students to make sure that they were aware that if they took these 3 classes, for example, or these 2 classes, they would complete these credentials. Once we saw that, we could also start moving our way back the student life cycle or the student pipeline to see that of the students who had successfully transferred to other institutions, there were more than 1,000 students who were no longer attending those transfer institutions, but who also hadn't completed. And so we can identify those students and encourage them to come back and complete with us, or to help them do a reverse transfer, or to identify the specific solution that works best for them. If we continue to work our way back towards the stop-outs, we call the students who are no longer with us, not making progress, stop-outs. We had over 6,000 students who were no longer at Wake Tech. They were not at another college or university, and they hadn't completed a credential. So our admissions folks can use that information to re-recruit those students to come back to Wake Tech and to continue their studies. If you keep working our way back, we see that we have, like most of you I'm sure, we have students who register but don't pay, and we have students who pay but don't attend. If you look at that 3404 number, it's about half and half fit into each of those categories. So again, we could target our communication with those students to specifically address the category that they're in. So if we had a student who registered but didn't pay, we could inform them about the payment plan that we have or scholarships that are available to try to help them come to Wake Tech. And if we've had students who pay but didn't attend, that money goes into the state treasury, but because the students hadn't attended on the census date, we didn't get FTE for that. We can try to address those issues and encourage students to attend since they've already paid. And if you keep working your way back, you can see again, we've got students who applied but were never admitted, and were admitted but didn't register, and it's again about half and half of the students fall into each of those categories. And since this tool identifies specifically the students and their contact information, we can tailor the communication we have with those students to address their specific instance. So here's what we were able to do with the tool, and we work. Kai and I are the we're developers of this tool, and we provide the information. We'll provide the information to our colleagues in the registrar's office and student services. We also, as I mentioned before, provide this information to our curriculum advisors, whether they're in our student services or in our academic areas. And so we can identify the completers, send that information to the registrar's office, and they can do the check, the near completers, and get that information to the faculty advisors, as I mentioned, so that we can communicate more effectively with the students to make sure that we're not missing out on potential completions. One of the things I would also mention is that the students can do their own graduation check, but again, it's unlikely that a student is going to take his or her transcript and compare it against 275 different programs, or to even know which programs to compare it to. So that's where we can provide that information more effectively through this tool. All right, let's see. And so this is the impact so far that it's had on Wake Tech. The top two lines there, 17-18 and 16-17, are since we've implemented Finish First at Wake Tech. And you can see basically that through a number of other sort of completion initiatives, the numbers in the previous years that we were able to, completers that we were able to generate in certificates, diplomas, and associate degrees, and we had been making progress. But when we were able to identify, and these include students who've earned more than one credential in some cases, but when we were able to provide this specific information to students, we were able to make a significant jump between 2015 and 2016. And although we haven't again jumped by 200+% from 16-17 to 17-18, that's because the number of completers that we're going to have as a part of this process is likely to level off once you start doing a better job of identifying who those students are. So you can see that over the last couple of years we've sustained about 5,000 plus certificates, in the high 200s in diplomas, which are typically, there are fewer diplomas than our other credentials, and then somewhere around the upper 2,000s, close to 3,000 when it comes to associate degrees. All right, now quickly. So we'd done this at Wake Tech. We thought it was working at Wake Tech, but one of the things Kai and I wanted to do was to see, is this something that has value outside of Wake Tech, or is it just we hadn't done a very good job at Wake Tech of identifying our completers, so it reflected some of our processes internally. So we had when we presented last summer at the Performance Summit, the folks at Lenore Community College had expressed some interest. So last fall we went to Lenore Community College, and the numbers here show testing this Finish First tool, how it worked at Wake Tech, and then the bar graphs for how it worked at Lenore. Lenore has fewer students, but it had a significant impact on the number of degrees, diplomas, and certificates they were able to identify after we spent an afternoon down there working with their folks and introduced them to the tool and helped them use the tool. We also went to Cape Fear Community College, and we've separated that out because at Cape Fear, I think we went there just before Christmas of 2017, and they took the tool, and we had introduced to them. They took the tool, and I think they applied it against every student who had ever gone to Cape Fear. And so if you look at the bar graphs there, you can see that before Finish First and after Finish First, it's a huge jump, and I think it's because when you looked at Wake Tech and you looked at Lenore, we were looking at a defined cohort of students. I think when they applied the tool at Cape Fear, they applied it to a much broader, larger cohort of students there. Since meeting with the folks at Lenore and Cape Fear, we've also gone to a number of other colleges. We were at Catawba Valley, worked with those folks. We went to Carteret Community College and introduced it there. We've been to Davidson County Community College and also Roanoke Chowan. So, and as I mentioned before, in addition to these slides, the slides give you an idea of what the tool can do. We're more interested in meeting with individual colleges and introducing the tool to them so that you can apply it to your information, your data, and your students and see whether it works for you. We also presented at the system office to the leadership there to see if there was interest in maybe applying it at the system level. We're still looking into the possibilities of that. Really, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, because at some point identifying previously unidentified completers, you're going to start to capture all of those, and if you implement a process that does this better, you'll have fewer and fewer of the students that you've missed. And so really what long-term what we see is the value of Finish First is that it helps our advisors be more proactive in their advising. So, and that applies to the students who are within striking distance or within one semester about of finishing. So one of the things these bar graphs show is that in addition to the students we identified who had already completed, we were able to identify a significant number of other students at Wake Tech, Lenore, and Cape Fear who have just one semester. If they take the right classes, the right 1, 2, 3 classes, they'll finish the certificate. And one of the things that we've found at Wake Tech at least, and it's borne out at Lenore and Cape Fear and the other colleges we talked to, is that really targeting, really tailoring your advice to these students can help focus them on the remaining one semester that they have so that they can complete one of these credentials. And in some cases, in many cases, it's completing a certificate, and the certificate doesn't necessarily end their studies at your college, but it is a milestone that they can take advantage of. And one of the things we also have worked on now is since those certificates at Wake Tech and at every college until the Department of Education changes the guidelines, the gainful employment applies. So if we're offering a certificate at Wake Tech, it's in demand in our community and for our employers. So one of the things we're working with students now is to make sure that they're aware of the value of the certificate that they've earned. All right, quickly, the next steps is, so what we've been able to do with the tools that we've developed is increase completion through identifying students, as I mentioned, who had already completed. We're going to also use it to maybe target our reverse transfer work on students who have transferred out of the college but are not currently at other institutions, encourage them to come back to us or to continue at those other colleges and make them more aware of the reverse transfer option. And then what we're calling stop-out recovery, which is those students who are no longer attending any institutions, they're close to completing at Wake Tech. We'd like to get those folks to come back. And then we're also working with our admissions folks to they have a strategic enrollment management team, and we're providing this data with them so that they can help recover their lost registrants and their lost admissions. And then we continue to develop the tools here. So we've worked with our IT staff to make this a web-based interface for our students and, for schools to use. Right now, it's an Excel-based tool, and it works fine. And everybody, the schools that we've worked with have had success with it. But we think we can even make it better and easier interface. So work on making it a web-based interface, and then also so that students can take control of their own studies. Provide access to students, so a student could put in his or her student ID, and then information would pop up for them to tell them how close they are to completing certain credentials. Our IT, our colleagues here in our information technology services area have done a great job recently of working on a way that when students log in to our college system, they'll get a push notification to let them know information about their progress. And we see this basically as one of the gold standards in educational technology is making personalized, adaptive tools, and we think that what we've been able to do, because it identifies each individual student and provides the information that they need to be successful, we think it meets that criteria of being personalized adaptive intervention. All right, that's Finish First in a nutshell. Typically what we do when we visit the colleges is that Kai runs a demo. What we often do is work out with the colleges. We get some information from them ahead of time so that we could run the tool against their student data and show them how it would work for them. In some cases, we've used our programs and their student data to show them how it might work, or our student data and their program data. But in most cases, what we like to do is to get both transcript examples from the colleges that we visit and their programs, and we run the tool against the two of them to show how it might work. So questions?
Mr. Ryan, you have a few questions in the chat box on the left. So the first is, how does a school apply to utilize this tool? And what is the cost?
Yeah, so great. So there's even an earlier question there. Couldn't this be a system service? So yeah, we've talked to the system office about this. Since the student transcript and programs, at least at the associate degree level, are at the system office level, the conversation we had with Lisa Chapman and the team there was maybe there's a solution where we could apply it for the entire system. One of the missing pieces now is typically, at least in my experience, we don't have to put all of our certificates, load all of our certificates in at the system level, but that's something that we could address. And so we've had those conversations. All right. So basically, to apply and use this tool, currently the process we have in place is that you contact Kai and I, and we schedule a visit that we come to your college and introduce the tool to you and work with. Folks at Lenore did a really good job of when we came there. They had a broad range of people in the room from their IT, from registrar's office, from academics and others that we could present to. And then since every college works differently, they could figure out how best to apply Finish First there. So currently what we've done is that we schedule visits to the college, and we come, and it takes us a couple hours. We do this presentation, but the more important part is that we run a demo and show you how it works, and then talk to you about how you can apply it at your college. The cost. So basically, this is something that we, because we developed it with, just as part of our normal job, it's essentially developed with state resources, and we're, so there's no cost. There's no cost to you. All right, what a wonderful tool. So Linda has asked about credential that the student never registered for. So one of the things that came out here at Wake Tech when we started to identify this information about the students, we invited stakeholders to be involved in sort of defining how the data was going to be used at Wake Tech. And one of the things that that group has been able to do, academic and student services, is to sort of set the parameters that we at Wake Tech were comfortable with in how we would award certificates, diplomas, and degrees based upon what we thought were the appropriate measures. In presenting to other colleges, each of those, one of the reasons that having a lot of people in the room is that they can see what the data is, and then they can also go through that same process of sort of determining what do they think is the best way to use that data. And it hasn't been the same at every college. Some folks set slightly different parameters. What we do is we identify the students, we provide the data, and it's internal processes at each college to determine what works for them. At Wake Tech, what we've basically done is that if a student has earned a certificate, we inform the student that they've earned that certificate, and we just basically award it. At Wake Tech, we don't have a fee associated with certificates, in completing certificates, so that doesn't engage any other processes. So certificates are fairly straightforward. We don't always, our staff here has decided that if somebody's earned an associate degree and they've also, in retrospect, earned certificates under that associate degree, we don't award them those additional certificates. At other colleges, they've decided that they will do that. So it does vary from college to college. Do you use SAS to do this? One of the things we wanted to do from the beginning was to use the readily available tools. So it's built using Visual Basic that's in Excel, and it runs on I said originally it did run on Kai's Surface, but if you recall that I mentioned that it looks like Cape Fear gave us every student who has ever attended Cape Fear. When Kai tried to run it using all the transcripts that they sent us, it blew up his Surface. So he asked for a slightly more powerful laptop, and I have approved his procurement request to get him a laptop. But basically this works with everybody's got Excel and everybody has a computer, so it doesn't require anything beyond that. Tools like SAS are useful, but it's not necessary. Basically, this tool that we've developed is not dependent upon any particular platform. Any other questions? So again, there's no cost. It is nice if you have, if we come and visit you, if you have like refreshments, but other than that, we're a fairly cheap date.
From the audience.
And I'm sorry Kai wasn't able to talk, but like I said, he's recovering from. I told him he'd do anything to get out of a webinar presentation, including having his gallbladder taken out.
I'm still here.
You're still there?
I'm still here.
That's good, Kai. Any questions for the technical guy, Kai? He's on the phone. Yeah, so a little other background about the cost. Wake Tech, there's a lot of educational technology companies out there. They think highly of their tools, and because they think highly of them, they charge a significant amount of money. And we've been approached by a number of companies selling us products. One of the things that we wanted to see was, and in the case of one particular company, to do something similar to this, but not even as effective for us as this. It was going to cost Wake Tech, because of its size, $250,000 a year. And so we said, well, can we develop something here that's significantly cheaper than that? And I did mention that, I don't know, did I mention that Kai's the staff member of the year for the community college system? But even as good as he is, I'm not paying him $250,000 a year. So this turns out to be less expensive for us to develop. And because we developed it essentially with state money, it's yours to use for no cost.
Gentlemen, just a quick reminder, if you're on the phone and you have a question for our presenter, you can press *6. I'll give you a few more moments to ask our presenters any that you may have. If not, I'd like to thank Mr. Bryan and Dr. Wang for their knowledge and expertise in creating this tool, as well as their willingness and ability to share it to others who may benefit from its usage. So definitely connect with them, and if you, for those who want a copy of this presentation, I have recorded this session, and I will make the recording available through the initial email communication that we sent out to everyone. And if there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to thank our presenters and thank you for attending this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, JJ.
Thank you, JJ.